Welcome back to the Resistance Podcast. My name's Connor.
And I'm Thurston.
He's Thurston. And this is the Resistance Podcast. Thanks for tuning in. It's a chilly morning here in Los Angeles, but we're bundled up.
Yep.
We're ready to go. Thurston's got a nice nice turtleneck on like Steve Jobs. So he's warm.
Oh, it's gray, not black.
Not black, but it's in the same family.
Okay.
It's in the same family. Today, guys, we're going to talk about everything protein. So we're going to talk about why it's important, what it does, its functions in the body. We're going to talk about quality, quantity, how much can you take at once, all the fun things surrounding protein.
Absolutely, yeah.
But first, let's get into it. Thurston, why on earth would I want to eat protein?
Protein.
Why do I need to consume this
protein
molecule?
Premier, the number one. I think that's what it comes from. It's like the most important thing. That's the word meaning.
Are you taking it back to like its origins?
Origins, yeah. 18-something, 38-ish, when they first talked about protein.
1838?
Something like that, yeah.
Wow.
Yep. So protein, yeah. So protein, for sure, when it comes to nutrition, is the most important of the macronutrients. Obviously, there's fat, there's carbohydrates, and protein.
Mm-hmm.
Because protein, I mean, your whole body is made of protein. Your hair, nails, skin, obviously your muscles, organs, everything is made of protein. Plus, protein has all these different functions, like it transports fats and oxygen, neurotransmitters from the amino acids, which we'll talk about. So it really is essential. And we have literally essential parts of protein that if we don't consume them, we'll die. So you just ate fat and carbohydrates with no protein, you wouldn't survive. So we absolutely have to take protein as part of the diet. And really a key factor is that it supports muscle tissue. And then the impact of muscle on health is a huge factor as well. So that's why and protein, I think we've mentioned it a few times where I'm working on this whole protein program, but wow, I've gone so deep into the research and really want to get this right because it's just the fundamental core of health. Yeah. And it's just so important. I mean, already I've gone through over 50 studies and there's so many really awesome studies that's just come out in the last year, which we can talk about as well. So really excited to talk about it. So, might jump around the place, but this is one of the ones where I think because the very first podcast we did was on eccentric training, and I think that was a crucial one. But this one, I'm hoping is going to be the number one podcast that we've done so far because it really is essential. So anybody listening, this could transform your health, your longevity, weight loss, any goals that you have, but just overall metabolic health, quality of life. If you get the protein right, wow, you're well underway.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. So obviously there's a lot of functions that protein is used for in the body, but I think primarily today we'll talk about the importance of protein in muscle.
Yeah.
So let's just talk about muscle a little bit. I know in the other podcasts we've obviously talked about metabolism and muscle a lot, but let's lay it out there in case someone's just tuning in for the first time. Just talk about the importance of muscle, skeletal muscle, and then I think that'll give us once we understand the importance of that, we can kind of dive into the nitty gritty on protein.
Absolutely. It's kind of funny, I think I was only thought about this a few weeks ago, but I think bodybuilding has caused the association of like muscle just being this weird thing that
just for aesthetics,
just
for
an
egomaniacs
thing that you have these bulging muscles, and has actually put people off resistance training and protein, because I mean that's really the crux of your overall health. Like muscle is the largest organ of your body, and it has an incredible impact on your energy, your quality of life, your metabolic health, blood sugar control. So even if you think of it like that, like active muscle tissue, when you take in carbohydrates and your blood sugar level rises, if you have enough good quality muscle, you just use that up as energy. And we know that, and we've talked about this before when it comes to metabolic health, that now over 50% of people are either pre-diabetic or diabetic.
Right.
And metabolic health only 6.8% of people are metabolically healthy, so 93% are not. So, and a crucial part of that is having good quality muscle. So that's why and protein is essential for the muscle. So that's how it all.
It's not just for looks;
together.
It has a very important function in the body.
Yeah, because if you think of like a healthy teenager or young person, they've got really good tone muscle, and then they're obviously much healthier metabolically compared to somebody who's older. So if you just think of it like that, it's not about bulging muscles. It's not about bodybuilding. This is about incredible quality of life, incredible energy, and incredible health.
Yeah, strength output, all that kind of stuff, power.
Yeah.
And while we're on that, let's talk about the importance of muscle, or maintaining healthy muscle as we age, because I think this is one of the biggest issues people run into with their health.
Yeah. Sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle tissue as we age, that is really the main cause of our decline in health and aging is from that. So if you can maintain, even increase muscle tissue, it'll have a profound impact on your quality of life and longevity. And obviously we talked about that last time in great detail. So it really is absolutely vital.
Yeah, especially when paired with the resistance training as well. Because as we talked about before, maybe you want to touch on this now, the difference in losing type 1 muscle fiber versus type 2 muscle fiber, and the importance of having resistance training paired with a high protein diet.
Yeah, because that's a thing, I think we touched on that last time as well, that when you lose muscle tissue as you age, it's not the type 1, it's the type 2, which is a strength part. So you can do all the aerobics in the world, it's not going to prevent the loss of muscle tissue. So you really need to add in the resistance training. But even protein on its own, even without the exercise, will actually help preserve the muscle, the type 2 muscle tissue. So that's where protein is just... it's kind of funny, I think, back and forth. Like if I had to choose, and obviously ideally you do both, but I'm sort of 50-50. Part of me thinks, okay, I would do the resistance training, but I probably would choose the higher protein, good quality protein. That would be my number one if I wanted to have a really good quality of life and longevity. And that would be the number one thing that I would do.
That's amazing. Yep. Well, good. So we set the stage just a little bit for the importance of this. Let's go back. Let's rewind a little bit. When did we first start as humans really keying in on this issue of protein and how important it is? Where is all this coming from?
Well, I think it was in the 1830 something or whatever was the first mention of protein, and we started to kind of understand it. And I guess ever since then. And then when more and more research has come out, and I'll go through quite a bit, I've got quite a bit here on all these different topics. Because when you hear it and you see, and a lot of this research has only come out in the last couple of years. There's obviously a lot of research from decades ago as well. But it's just showing super clearly more and more that the protein, taking in more and better quality protein is going to be the number one thing for quality of life. So, there's a huge emphasis on it now because the research is so compelling. Now, unfortunately, it always takes about 20 years before research hits the mainstream.
Of course.
But in scientific circles, it's pretty much like this is what you need to do for a healthy life. Yeah,
even recently, like when some of these studies come out, like November of last year?
Yeah, well, one really interesting one was December the 17th. So it's time travels fast. But
a couple months ago.
Because I was going to say just a few weeks ago, but yeah.
Feels like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah.
We're already in February.
Exactly, yeah.
Crazy. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the specifics let's break down protein a little bit. No pun intended. So protein is built up of amino acids, and you've touched on the importance of the essential amino acids that we have to eat. We don't create those naturally. Can you talk about what those are, their functions, and just start talking about a little bit about the building blocks of protein.
Yeah. So protein. So if you think of protein as a wall, then the amino acids are like the blocks, and
the bricks.
The bricks, exactly. So you've got in muscle about 20 different types of amino acids. Now the body can produce some of them, but there are 9 essential amino acids. Now what essential means is if you don't ingest them through nutrition, you'll die. So they're essential. Funnily enough, there's no essential carbohydrates. And there are some, but only a very small amount of essential fats, essential fatty acids,
right,
which is EPA and DHA. So, but other than that, it's really all protein, and in particular those 9 essential. Now, of course, there's minerals and vitamins that we need. Vitamins, as we say in Europe.
Hilarious.
So, but yeah, so those 9 essential amino acids you just absolutely have to get through the diet. And if you're missing even one, like completely, you die. Or if they're in short supply, your health will suffer. And so that's the first thing, is the amino acids. Really important to understand. Now it's interesting because when you think of protein, when you're trying to absorb the protein, you need all 9 essential amino acids in the right ratios for you to absorb that protein.
Right.
And that's really kind of fascinating, because let's say, you eat some food and it has 20, 30 grams of protein, but if one amino acid is really, really low of the essential ones, it's like you have, like say, I'm just making up numbers here to illustrate it, but let's say 8 of the 9 essential amino acids were really high and 9 out of 10 or whatever on the scale, but one is only like 1 out of 10. All the others you won't absorb because it has to be in that, it's like called a limiting amino acid. So you draw a line and then you're only absorbing a fraction of the protein in that food. So you might think, oh, wow, I just consumed 20 grams of protein, whereas you might only absorb maybe 2 or 3 grams if it's an incomplete protein. So it means one of the essential amino acids is very low or lacking.
Yeah. So this is one of the qualities, or one of the ways that you can look at the quality of a protein is for the amino acids, the essential amino acids. Another one is absorption rate.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that? Because you might have a protein that has all 9 essential amino acids, but is it necessarily superior to others? Because it depends on how fast it absorbs.
Exactly. Yeah. So let me kind of run through, because I've got a lot of research here. I'd love to kind of go through some of this. So initially, when you're talking about the absorption rates and amino acids, so this is interesting. Protein quality evaluation. I need my glasses here.
No worries.
So they brought in, and it's what's used the most at the moment, is the protein digestibility corrected amino acid score, or BCAAS. So a lot of people will look at that and go, okay, that's a good quality protein, that's not. And it tries to look at the obviously corrected amino acid score, digestibility, but it's certainly not perfect. So there's all these different types. So when they evaluate this, there used to be like amino acid score, nitrogen balance, protein efficiency ratio, NPU, which is net protein utilization. And then this is the one that they use the most. Now, interestingly, they're actually looking at a new framework, bringing in this idea of the essential amino acid 9 score, because they're trying to do it where, because there's so many shortcomings with all of these different types of things to really understand, okay, how much am I actually getting in? Am I getting in enough? And they're helpful indicators, but they're just not perfect. For instance, again, really good, interesting study that just came out recently. Let me bring this one up. So this is a really good example of how these scores really don't bring everything into account. So this was the Journal of Nutrition, and this was only published about a year ago, received 21st of July 2023. So higher muscle protein synthesis rates following ingestion of an omnivorous meal compared to an isocaloric, an isonitrogenous vegan meal in healthy older adults. So essentially what that means is they're looking at the absorption of protein into the muscle, comparing just a normal meal that we've, an omnivore meal, but they're matching the same amount of calories and the same even amino acid score. Mm-hmm. So even with exactly the same protein, same amino acids, and the same calories, that they found quite a difference. So conclusion, ingestion of a whole food omnivorous meal containing beef resulted in greater postprandial muscle protein synthesis rates when compared with the ingestion of the vegan meal. And the difference was like a 47% increase in muscle protein synthesis. So you can have the exact same meal matched for everything, but because the type of protein is different, the absorption rate is like a lot different. So if you used all the other scores, you wouldn't see this. I'm just going to quote some of the things from this study because it's a really good study. Several studies observed that the ingestion of animal proteins, such as dairy proteins, resulted in greater postgranule muscle protein synthetic response when compared to the ingestion of the equivalent amount of plant-derived proteins. So, and then it's interesting when you look at the meals, and we'll show this up on the screen here. So again, completely matched. Now, I thought it was interesting because in the omnivore meal, to match the vegan meal in terms of the same amount of carbohydrates, fats, etc., and I don't know if this is normal, maybe you can tell me this, but they had to add quite a lot of applesauce.
To match the carbs?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I don't eat applesauce, but maybe, I don't know how common that is, but it's quite a lot if you look at it on the plate.
Yeah, Midwesterners like to throw a little applesauce in there, a little side dish.
Yeah, because it's about 20 grams of sugar. So I just thought that was interesting because it was a lot. But that was a really good study, kind of showing the difference.
So you can eat hundreds of calories less with your omnivore meal versus the vegan and get the same amount of protein, and it absorbs better.
Yeah. Exactly. And this isn't, because I know once you start to get into this, because we've talked about this before, but everyone's in all these camps. So the vegan versus paleo versus this, and I'm just looking at the science here about protein.
Exactly.
And you can always compensate, and I'll give you tips and tricks. So if you do want to be more plant-based, just understand the reality of the situation, and then you can do a lot of things to counteract that, like taking amino acids, etc., and mixing certain proteins together, etc., to increase your muscle protein synthesis. But it's just, this is just
it's fascinating.
Factual,
it's interesting to think that the amino acids are the same, yet the animal protein was absorbed at such a better rate.
Yeah.
That's weird.
Yeah, because what they were saying is the thing that they don't on all of these scales account for is the sort of anti-nutrients in foods.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure it says it here.
Plants are kind of trying to kill us on a small level.
Exactly, yeah. So because they have protective mechanisms, and that's, you have to sort of counteract that. And there are ways, like through the cooking process, through fermentation, etc., you can break down some of these anti-nutrients when you really kind of get into it. But that's just,
and that really is one of the huge differences between other animals, and humans.
Yeah. So the presence of an absence of various components that constitute the whole food matrix can strongly impact protein digestion. So let's see, because I have all the highlights here. Plant-based whole foods typically contain many anti-nutritional factors. So dietary fiber, trypsin inhibitors, and phytates that lower protein digestibility, and as such may compromise the postprandial rise in circulating amino acid concentrations and reduce the subsequent capacity to stimulate muscle protein synthesis. So when you're aware of that and you are plant-based and looking at this and not, just looking at the science of it, then there's a lot of things you can do to counteract that. But just in general, there is a big difference. I mean, if you think about it, animals have incredible digestive systems to break down plants.
Yeah.
And then that's, from a human perspective, obviously, we're omnivores. We're not carnivores. We're not
herbivores.
we're not herbivores. We're omnivores. And if you look at our digestive system, I mean, a cow has 4 stomachs. It has like thousands of times more enzymes and bacteria.
Yeah.
And much bigger
miles of intestines.
Yeah, exactly. Way more. And all they do all day is just do that and digest, and there's no energy left over for anything else.
That's what they just graze.
Yeah, so they kind of do the work for us, and then we just take the protein from them, and that's why it does work much better. Now, again, like, I'm not, person wants to be plant-based, just be aware of that and then try to counteract those things and be super aware of it. Funnily enough, because I work with a lot of vegans and vegetarians over the years, and because I understand that, we get amazing results because I know exactly what they need to do to counteract those things. But at the same time, I just want to be honest and straightforward about the science of protein.
Sure.
It is an important thing to kind of cover.
Yeah, we'll just present the facts.
Exactly.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, let's get into a little bit more of this. I mean, will you just tell us a little bit about protein synthesis and protein breakdown? Because these are 2 things we're going to talk about a little bit, probably a lot over the next hour or so.
Yeah.
So will you just give us a little idea on what those are? Because I know you already mentioned protein synthesis once.
Yeah, and it might be an oversimplification, but yeah, protein muscle synthesis is just the ability of building muscle tissue. So you're using that protein to build, and not just muscle in terms of your biceps, but even your organs, other parts of the body. Because as well as the muscle in your body, your organs are made of protein, 1/3 of your bones and 1/3 of your brain. So anything where you need to, basically build tissue in the body, you need muscle protein synthesis. That's how you measure that.
Yeah.
And then the opposite is muscle protein breakdown.
Right.
So you break down muscle tissue. For instance, funny enough, when you work out and you train the muscle, you'll actually break down muscle tissue. So, and it's important that you do both, because you want to constantly renew and create new cells in the body, get rid of bad ones or even toxic ones, or ones that are not as effective, and then replace them with new ones. So it's this constant regeneration of breaking down, building up, breaking down, building up to renew the body. So if you think of it like that, that's probably the best way to understand it. Now, of course, when it comes to preventing muscle loss, you want to obviously make sure that you're building more than you're breaking down.
Right.
And there's lots of, and that maybe brings us up onto a whole other area where, why or how do we lose muscle as we age? And is it just sort of a linear fashion, or are there certain things that cause us to lose muscle?
I think that's great. Let's dive right into it.
Yeah, because it's funny.
Talk about catabolic events and...
Yeah, exactly. Well, there you go. So, because, I think most people understand that we lose muscle as we age. So someone who's 80 has less muscle than when they're 20.
Right.
That's probably not too startling. But it's not just this linear, gradual just thing with aging. There's maybe a little bit of that, but actually it's all these catabolic events that happen. So, for instance, if you, like bed rest, this is a huge thing because, if somebody is sick or they get an injury,
in the hospital,
they're in the hospital for a week or
surgery or
a few weeks or even months, then they're not being active. And the effects of that, like even a week or 10 days of bed rest, you can lose like 2 to 4 pounds of muscle tissue, and even more in terms of strength. And it has all these other detrimental effects.
It's crazy when you think about how long it takes to build that muscle.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Yeah, so it's all these little catabolic events. And I'll go through some of the research on that, because that's fascinating as well, because with this new protein program that I'm putting together, you really want to, as soon as you have a catabolic event, well, number one, is there anything that you can do to prevent it,
right,
or to slow it down when it does happen? So if you do have, if you are in that situation where, for whatever reason, you got to, it could be a flu, a cold, COVID, these types of things where you're laying up for a while, or you're in the hospital with an injury or an illness that you can't move around, you're losing all this muscle tissue. But even things, funny enough, like weight loss is a catabolic event.
Oh, sure.
Because most people that lose weight, a lot of it is muscle tissue.
On that deep deficit for too long.
Yeah. So let me because it's some really cool things that I'm going to read out on this one.
Facts, please.
Okay.
Money, please.
So here's a really interesting one. So I'll talk about the bed rest in a minute, but this one, impact of weight loss and weight gain trajectories on body composition. So this is a really good study, and this was just November 2023, so very recent, really good study, because this is what happens most people. Like, most people will lose weight, put it back on, lose weight, put it back on.
Right.
Like 95% of people don't manage to keep weight off.
Yeah.
But each time they do that, they're losing a little bit of muscle tissue. And so in this study, they showed, so Professor Yates was the head scientist of this.
Love him.
These individuals regained fat mass to baseline levels, but lost 1.5 kilograms of fat-free mass. That's like 3.3 pounds. Conclusion, weight cycling may be associated with a progressive loss of fat-free mass, in other words, lean body tissue, and or gain in fat mass in those with overweight and obesity and at risk for type 2 diabetes. Now, it's interesting, when he was interviewed, he said, what's particularly interesting to us that the individual who lost and regained weight went on to regain all of their fat mass but lost 1.5 kilograms of fat-free mass. This equates to about a decade of aging. Now that's huge.
Holy cow.
You lose weight, you put it back on. Like, I know everyone's thinking, oh, well, I just won't put it back on. But I'm sorry, 95% of people will. Although after this podcast, and we really explain all this, maybe you won't. And that's why I think this podcast.
Do you want to touch on the reason why they put the fat back on right now with your metabolism? And
yeah, well, two things. I mean, most people, when they lose weight, what do? They just reduce their nutrient intake.
Right.
Reducing their calories. And then so they're taking in less protein, they're losing muscle tissue.
Exactly.
Metabolism slows up.
And then you go back to eating normally.
Exactly.
And you're not burning that many calories. Yeah.
Exactly. And that's always the biggest problem.
Yeah.
So that's huge right there. And then I'll talk a little bit about bed rest or lack of exercise and how that affects it. So this is a really good study on the bed rest aspects. This was actually published in National Institute of Health, and protecting muscle mass and function in older adults during bed rest. So what they say in this, first of all, they explain that after the age of 30, adults lose 3 to 8% of their muscle mass per decade. Now, bed rest or acutely inactivity associated with hospitalization or disease poses a potent threat to muscle tissue and functional capacity. Now, approximately 71% of male and 42% of female older Americans over the age of 65 can already be characterized as moderately sarcopenic based on skeletal muscle index. So already they're in really
muscle decline.
Serious muscle decline. Thus, with advanced age, it becomes increasingly likely that even a brief clinical mandated period of bed rest could initiate a serious decline in muscle strength and functional capacity. And that's a tipping point where some may not fully recover. So this is a serious issue, So they kind of talk about it, but interestingly, and we'll talk about this further on, but assuming the rate of muscle loss is somewhat linear, but they find that approximately 3 to 6-fold greater rate of muscle loss in bedridden older adults. So that's 3 to 6 times more muscle loss when they're bedridden, which is huge.
Wow.
And a lot of them will lose. Again, I think I just mentioned that about 2 pounds of muscle just with 10 days of bed rest. So muscle loss primarily by a reduction of muscle protein synthesis. We talked a little bit about that. So,
no, I'm curious, is part of this muscle loss because their overall calories are just lower when they're sick or on bed rest, or is it specifically because you're not moving and you're just not using it? So if you don't use it, you lose it.
It'd be more not moving, yeah.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, because if you're just lying down and not moving, the muscle just atrophies.
Wow.
Like, it's one of the things I always say, like, movement is life, stagnation is death.
Right.
It's horrendous for all health measures, everything from blood sugar control, blood pressure, depression. All these things happen from bed rest. It's a serious issue. And it's funny, all the things they say in this is like an important caveat, however, is that resistance exercise should be accompanied by adequate protein and energy-rich diet to optimize the potential for a synergistic anabolic response. Interesting little thing that came up in this study was essential amino acid supplementation in healthy elderly during bed rest subjects. They consume 15 grams of essential amino acids between the meals that provided the RDA of protein. After 10 days of bed rest, muscle protein synthesis was decreased 30% in control, but maintained in the supplementation group. So they actually maintained just by taking 15 grams of amino acids. That should be in every hospital all the time.
That's wild.
It's really incredible. So you can counteract these things by getting in enough really good quality protein.
Wow.
And we'll talk about the supplements and stuff later on. But it's just huge. Now, one other thing as well, and I've got the study here.
Yeah, go into it.
Is, because a lot of people go, okay, well, I don't have bed rest, so I'm fine. But reduced physical activity. So even a short-term reduction in physical activity has a significant impact on skeletal muscle protein and carbohydrate metabolism. So what they found with this is, so a lot of people don't just even move around enough during the day. And if you're getting in less than, say, 4,000 steps a day, you're getting similar effects of the bed rest. Not quite to the same, it takes longer.
Wow.
But that's a lot of things where most people are not getting in enough exercise, just movement throughout the day, and they're getting similar effects to bed rest. So that's something that you really want to be super careful about as well. So
don't put yourself on unneeded bed rest.
Exactly.
Wow. All right. Yeah, it almost seems to me it's like, obviously there's a lot of these things you can't control, but I'm like, man, if I'm about to go in if I know I'm gonna have to go in for a surgery or something, I'm like, man, I would just be pounding as much protein as possible and trying to put on as much muscle as I can in anticipation for that. Yeah,
because one of the things I'm working on with this new program is that whenever you get a catabolic event, that as soon as you're capable of afterwards, quickly then increase your protein intake, quality of protein with resistance training to counteract that.
Yeah, I've told you this before, but my dad last year had a pretty invasive surgery, and he was a little sick, and so in anticipation, he's like, I'm not, I don't want to go through exactly what you're talking about. So for a few months before that, he knew he had time, and he hit the weights really hard, really upped his protein, and in his early 60s was able to come out of his surgery well recovered, way ahead of schedule, and wasn't having issues putting on extra fat afterwards and losing all of his muscle. And so it really helped him in the long run, staying ahead of it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Actually, there's one other one as well, because this affects everybody today, because they actually looked at this in relation to COVID. So now, not necessarily, funnily enough, COVID, the disease, but the whole lockdowns. So let me bring this one up.
The effects of lockdowns, yeah.
Yeah. So this is the study on the effects of the catabolic crisis on patients' prolonged immobility after COVID-19 infection. What they found was that quarantine, isolation, bed rest associated with COVID-19 infection favored the loss of muscle and bone mass, especially in elderly patients. The sudden and significant reduction in physical activity through various measures taken in the general population during the pandemic led to an increased incidence of sarcopenia, both in patients who did not have COVID-19 infection and amongst those quarantine hospitalized for this condition. So even people that never had COVID, because of like obviously the lockdowns and everything, it's
We're
interesting.
Just handing them bad health.
Yeah, it's interesting because I actually produced a video weeks into it, like bit of a warning saying, wow, like what about our metabolic health? And this was literally only like a couple of months into it. I was like, already I saw the data where people were exercising 50% less and consuming a lot more ultra-processed foods. And that's one of the biggest problems, is that ultra-processed foods are very low in protein. And that's now 60-70% of our diets are from ultra-processed foods. So ultra-processed foods, the main components is sugar, right? Industrial seed oils, which is fat.
Delicious.
And then processed carbohydrates, like ultra-processed carbohydrates. So none of that is protein.
Yeah, it's not going to help us.
That's a serious problem.
Yeah, it's going to.
So obviously those years now coming out of that, we're going to see massive increases rates of obesity, diabetes, sarcopenia, etc. So that's a major catabolic crisis right there. So if you think about it, throughout your life, you're going to have these times when, you know, you're not feeling well, you don't exercise for a few weeks, or you're just at home, you're laying up, or maybe you're traveling. There's so many different catabolic events, and weight loss, as we mentioned, is one of them. Bed rest, obviously, is the big one. But all of those, if you don't do anything to counteract, so anytime you get a catabolic event, and this is a big one, you really have to counteract that straight away. More protein resistance training anytime that happens. And if you don't, you're literally accelerating the aging process. Like that weight loss study, Professor Yates said, like 10 years. You're advancing the aging by 10 years just from losing weight and putting it back on again.
Wow.
That's huge. You know?
That's crazy.
So that's really important to understand for sure.
Amazing.
Yep.
Amazing. Yeah, so we kind of touched on quality of protein with amino acids and all that kind of stuff. Let's get into quantity. How much protein? There's been a lot of debates over this, you know, over the years with supplementation and all this kind of stuff. But how much can you absorb at once? Because a lot of people for a lot of years have been throwing out only 25 grams at once. You hear 25 to 50 grams. And now there's some new research suggesting 100 grams or more at a time can be easily absorbed. So where do you stand? What does the research say about quantity?
Well, I have to say this is a bit of vindication for me, because I've been questioning that for years and never bought into this idea that you can only absorb 20 to 30 grams per meal. Like, it never made sense to me from an evolutionary perspective, because, you know, as hunter-gatherers, we kind of went from feast to famine. We'd have a big meal and then we may not eat for a day or two. It's, right. You know, we certainly weren't eating like constantly the way we do today.
Oh, yeah.
And even if you look at other species and other animals, they do the same thing. They have a big meal and they may not eat for quite a while.
Yeah.
And I would argue maybe that could be better for the digestive system and all these other things. So this idea, and the problem with this is they look at mechanisms and they look at very short-term little indicators, and they miss things. So a lot of these studies, they're only looking at 3 to 6 hours post-meal absorption, and they're looking at the protein muscle synthesis, but they don't take in the whole picture of muscle protein breakdown. And this study that came out literally, you know, very, very recently has completely thrown that. December the 17th,
2023. Yeah. Boom.
So I have to go through this study. So this is really, really awesome. So here it is, and I'll just love this study. Serious vindication for me. The anabolic response to protein ingestion during recovery from exercise has no upper limit. So what they found in this study is they actually compared ingestion of 25 grams of protein and 100 grams of protein. And 100 grams is a lot.
Oh, yeah.
You know, like I said, nearly everybody said 20, 25, maybe 30 grams is all you can absorb per meal. But they went as high as 100 grams. And they found that you actually absorbed every gram. Like none of it was oxidized. But what they did was different. We showed that the ingestion of 100 grams of protein resulted in greater and more prolonged, this is over 12 hours, anabolic response when compared to the ingestion of 25 grams. So a net gain or loss of muscle protein occurs as a consequence of a positive or negative muscle protein balance. So that's synthesis minus breakdown. So we talked about that. So you build it up, break it down. So you look at the balance of those. So it's interesting because what they were saying, the problem with all the studies up to now, the concept has been based on metabolic tracer studies in vivo in humans that have been confined to the assessment of the postprandial protein synthetic response following the ingestion of moderate amounts of protein, less than or equal to 45 grams over relatively short durations, so less than or equal to 6 hours. So all the other studies were looking at less protein and then less time. When ingesting larger amounts of protein, such a short time frame will likely to be insufficient to allow complete digestion and amino acid absorption. So that's why they did it over 12 hours. So here we confirm our hypothesis of a dose-dependent increase in the magnitude and duration of protein-derived amino acid availability and muscle and whole body protein synthesis rates with a negligible yeah, that one.
I hope.
Impact
they don't have
of
that one in
amino acid
Ireland.
Oxidization. In other words, they saw almost no amino acid oxidization because if you're not utilizing it, well, then you break it down through oxidization just for energy or whatever. So that was just, an amazing study. And it's funny because it's really making the rounds. I actually posted a little survey on LinkedIn and said, how much protein do you think you can absorb per meal? And I had 10, 25, and then 100 or whatever. And nearly everybody picked the sort of 25 gram. A couple of people picked the 100, but they probably knew it was a trick question or whatever. So sure enough.
I tested that theory with just eating a pound of ground beef all the time. I've kept and grown muscle, so I eat very large quantities at once.
It's interesting in that study because they talked about, well, this is obviously an extreme example, but other species, of course, this is what happens all the time.
Thinking of like a boa constrictor.
Well, they were talking about
eat like a deer.
A what?
Like a boa constrictor eating a deer or something. And it's just like you get like one giant chunk of protein and you don't eat again for like weeks.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Well, the example they used was like a snake because the snake will just ingest like a rodent or whatever.
That's what I'm talking about.
Oh, sorry. What do you call it?
A boa constrictor.
Okay. I don't
know. A big snake.
I don't know enough about snakes.
Where he's talking about small snakes. I'm talking about big snakes.
Well, I just said snakes. Okay.
But exactly. Right, okay. That's crazy. Same concept.
Sorry, I was like, what is that? But yeah.
Like a python.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. I know nothing about snakes.
That's okay.
Except for if I see one, I'll run a mile.
Just the only good snake is a dead snake.
So, but yeah, so they'll like over 10 days absorb the nutrients from that. So that's obviously an extreme example. So that was a like really cool, groundbreaking study. That's just everyone that's being saying that now has to re-look at it and whatever. And you just got to rethink that now because even some people are into intermittent fasting or even OMAD, 1 meal a day. And because I know people, I have some clients that do that and they're maintaining their muscle mass. So if they could only absorb 20 or 30 grams in one meal and they're only taking one meal a day,
something we're off on.
They'd be emaciated,
Well, I want to ask you this because like certain proteins are absorbed fast and some are absorbed, on a longer duration, slower. So if I were to have, let's compare like two dairy things, so whey versus casein. Whey is a faster absorbing protein. If I were to eat 100 grams of that at once versus 100 grams of casein, would this be the exact same result, or does it depend on the absorption rate of the protein?
Well, that's another major vindication for me because we've always been saying casein's better than whey.
Because it's slower.
Because it's slower. So slow protein is what you want. because I mean, all these things have been debunked. First of all, this anabolic window. So you work out and then, oh my God, quickly, like straight away, gulp down some protein because you've only got like a short amount of time. But anyone who works out, they know that it takes days before that muscle rebuilds.
It's like, otherwise, why would we rest for 3 days in between hitting chest or something?
Yeah,
it doesn't make
I mean,
sense.
48, 72 hours is really the time where you build back the muscle. Because you'll know, because if you go and work out again, like
you're
6
not ready.
hours later, you've broken down the muscle tissue. Hasn't built back up yet.
Right.
So even a day later, you won't be as strong. 2 days later, it's really the third day.
Yeah.
So this anabolic window has been debunked, which makes no sense. So what you want is constant good supply of amino acids to gradually grow that muscle, not this short like burst. And that's always something. I mean, it's funny because I was around when the very, very first whey protein came out. It was actually called designer protein. And we were so excited because I was working in the supplement industry. It's 25 years ago. And wow, it was...
You were 1 year old?
I wish.
That's amazing.
But we were like so excited. We literally got a big, huge crate of this new protein thinking that, because they were saying it's 168% better. The amino acid profile is better. And we got these, and we were like taking loads of it, pounding it down. And after like a couple of weeks, we're like, where are the muscles from this? We didn't see any impact because we were taking casein. We didn't see any improvement at all. If anything, it was worse.
So funny. So there was casein powder before there was whey powder.
Yeah. Whey was a new thing.
Interesting.
Yeah. See, whey was
it a lot cheaper back then than the casein?
Yeah, well, I can't remember because maybe when the very first one, because they were hyping it up so much, they probably marked it up a lot. But because the profit margin's way bigger on whey than it is for casein.
That's what I'm thinking, yeah.
Is, like when you make cheese, for instance,
right?
Whey used to just be the waste product that comes off and you just feed it to the pigs or throw it out or whatever. So, and then they decided, okay, we can use that and make protein powder.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying, look, whey protein is not terrible or bad, but it's just nowhere near the hype that came with it.
Right.
And I would argue for sure that casein is way better because it's a slow protein. And this was even way back in 97, I think it was, that Boire study, where the French study where they showed that whey protein was only lasting for about 15 minutes, whereas casein lasted for 7 hours.
Yeah.
And the anti-catabolic effect of casein, I think, was 34%, and in the whey was 0. So it didn't stop the breakdown. No, it helped muscle protein synthesis, but didn't stop the breakdown, whereas the casein did.
Wow.
Now, people will argue, well, we have more sophisticated ways of measuring these, and that was an old way or whatever. But, I mean, that's what we were finding. And that's the big thing is, like, you can look at all these studies and mechanisms, but there's nothing like real-world experience and working with people, and then we actually see results.
Right.
So it's funny because all these things that we were saying for decades are only being proven now. So like people would just say, no, you have to be wrong because everybody says whey is better. Everybody says you can only absorb 20 or 30 grams of protein. And now...
Yeah, I think a lot of that has to do with this
25
supplement.
25 years later, maybe
I think the supplement industry also really wanted to sell a bunch of, whey protein that had crazy margins too.
Yeah, the markup is much greater. We wanted it to be true, and then we would have made more money, but we just stuck with the casein because we just saw the results were better. Yeah.
What are your thoughts on protein supplements? Should we just be taking, smoothies and shakes? Is it as good as whole foods, like eating a steak or a piece of chicken or whatever? What are your thoughts?
I always favor real food, number one. But I do think, especially initially when you're trying to increase the protein, I definitely think they can be very convenient. And again, with the right ones, work very well. But food will always come first in my mind because there's all these cofactors and things that we don't even understand. In fact, another study, and I won't even read it out, but I'll pop it up on the screen or link to it, showed that like when you're even looking at eggs, for instance, because again, okay, I know this is not a supplement, but everyone's eating egg whites. And it drives me crazy every time I see it.
Because it's so low calorie.
Yeah, well, it's the egg whites on their own. lack, like all the amazing nutrients are in the yolk.
Oh, yeah.
Of course, people are terrified of fat and cholesterol and stuff, but that's, again, being debunked. But anyway, like choline and all these other nutrients in the egg yolk. But an interesting study was showing that when you took whole eggs versus egg whites, that the whole eggs worked much better. So you could have like less whole eggs versus more egg whites, and the whole eggs was actually better for muscle protein synthesis. And they don't even really fully understand why.
Right.
I mean, I suspect that because cholesterol is incredible for testosterone and all these other factors.
Yeah.
Because that's another thing, is the hormonal impact. So it's just when you isolate and you just look at things, and that's the problem with a lot of research.
Look at it
like
in
you
context.
can't see the wood for the trees.
Right.
And you're not taking everything into account. And there's still so much that we don't understand or don't know. So I always, aim for whole foods. But I certainly think the case for supplements for me, though, is that even when you're trying to do the best, and I do this, I try to get everything pasture-raised, grass-fed, organic, the right type of foods. But even when you do that, even down to soil depletion and all these other factors, it's hard to get the same nutrient levels that we used to. So even if you have an egg today compared to 50 years ago, the egg 50 years ago would be a lot more nutrient dense.
Yeah.
So... And even the soil,
supplements kind of help to
crop rotation, because it's all just about profit. So they don't really
it helps to close the gap, kind of.
Yeah. So I do think supplementation can be fantastic.
Unless you're just going out and bow hunting your own elk in the middle of Colorado,
exactly,
and your own grass-fed meat.
Yeah. So if you're, really extreme, maybe, but even then, like when you look at nutrient deficiencies, it's pretty bad.
Yeah, well, let me ask you this. I think most people, when you're eating a protein in a meal, you're going to have it paired with something else because, I know there's some of you guys out there, and I've fallen, into this category before, but most people aren't just going to sit down and just eat a piece of chicken or a steak. So, but we oftentimes will just drink protein by itself. Is that the best way to do it, or should we be pairing it with fats and carbs and other things to be getting the most absorption?
Great question, because that's another big one that we say that, again, I don't see other people saying this, and I think it's a big issue. Is we always
You're just being vindicated today.
I know, it's
this
awesome.
Is great.
I love it. I've been waiting 25 years for all this stuff to come out.
Yeah, it's good.
But yeah, no naked protein is what we say. So what does that mean? It means because your body, number one, requires energy, right? So even though protein is essential, the first thing that the body needs, because literally if you imagine a car without any gas, it's going to stop and you're dead, so you've got to have energy. So if you take protein on its own, like carbohydrates are a great source for energy, and so are fats.
Right.
And it's a different energy systems, but you can use both of those for energy. Protein you can, but it's not optimal. So protein is not good for just purely using as energy. And of course, you want protein to do everything else that we talked about, for the muscle, for the organs, for your hair, skin, nails, for every other function. So if you just take protein on its own and the body requires energy and you haven't taken any carbohydrates or fats with that protein, then the protein gets broken down, and that is where it gets oxidized.
Say the word.
Gluconeogenesis.
Yeah, say the word. There it is.
Gluconeogenesis.
Yeah. That's a good one to throw out at a dinner party.
Yeah, and
if
it's
you want
funny
to sound real smart.
Well, I just talked to one of the clients recently because he's doing a lot of other exercise, and he was saying, "Oh, I'm feeling tired and hungry, and what's going on?"
Yeah.
And I said, "So what do you do?" "Well, I just take a whey protein shake first thing in the morning." So do you take anything with it? No.
And then he was doing a lot of cardio.
Yeah, so that protein is actually getting, because you feel a bit lethargic. If you just take protein and no fat or carbs, try it for a couple of days.
Yeah, because your body, in this case, you hop on your bike for an hour, you get pretty glycogen, not deficient, but you burned up a lot of glycogen doing that, and your body's like, give me energy, give me sugar. So it's going to start breaking down that naked protein.
Exactly. Yeah. So you don't want to.
You want it diverting.
And that happens. It's very common, because even in food, like a person will have to think, because we're all told like fat's bad for you, and then we're told carbs are bad for you. Some people will have like a lean piece of chicken with a salad, right, at lunchtime. And again, unless the salad has a lot of like other things in it, but just a green salad, for instance, then you're getting no fats, no carbs, just protein, and you'll feel lethargic and you won't have the same energy. And then then you're not getting the benefits of the protein that you should.
Well, say you're making a shake. What are some practical things that you do to maybe add some fats or some carbs to it? Do you eat some foods with it, or do you put something into the shake?
So sometimes so again, it depends kind of what I'm doing, but so sometimes I might add some fruit, just a little bit. Like you don't want too much sugar, of course.
Like a low glycemic, like a berry.
Yeah, berries. I might take a small amount of banana, but not a lot because it's going to be a lot. And again, it depends on your system and all that kind of stuff. Or you could take fats. You could take like a bit of avocado in there, maybe a bit of MCT oil for energy, like coconut oil or something, or even a tiny bit of cream, or just some type of fat if you wanted to reduce the carbs, or some type of carbs. So either can work great. Something that I have actually do. The other thing that you can do if you do want to take whey protein is add some fiber.
Oh, you beat me to it. Come on, that was my next question.
Okay.
No, go ahead.
Because the fiber is great because then it slows down the absorption.
Yeah, right.
So you're kind of getting a little bit of that. So that can be good. So for sure, casein is the best. Paleo protein, the kind of beef protein, I would kind of mark as number 2 on the list. But again, adding some kind of fats and carbs with that. Then I would say whey protein. I don't think it's bad, but it's a fast protein, so it's not, I would take some fiber with it to counteract that.
Right.
And then it can be good. And then there's other ones. But again, of course, there's pea protein, but you want to, again, with the amino acids, you want to mix that with some like rice protein. So,
a lot of them are doing that these days, which is good. Together.
Personally, and there's still debate over this, but the soy I'm not a big fan of. There is some research, and again, we'll pop it up on the screen here, showing that the soy protein will reduce your testosterone.
Right.
Not a fan of that.
Right. That's
and that's important for both men and women for health and energy, for even psychological energy and drive. So very important. And of course, testosterone is anabolic. So
right.
Build that muscle. They're the things. Again, these side things that we don't take into account when we're looking at these things.
Yeah, let me ask you this while we're on the topic of supplementation. BCAAs, branched chain amino acids, and EAAs, essential amino acids.
More vindication.
Yes, please.
Okay, so
please.
Again, this is going back because again, I remember I was very lucky. By the way, I had these really good people that I learned from. This is 25 to 30 years ago, Tom and Tony, and they were so far ahead.
What's up, Tony?
They were so far ahead of everybody else, and just light years ahead. Because they used to always say, no, branched chain amino acids are, and everyone for decades,
they'll be right in the gym,
today,
just chugging.
Still think, and
while you're working out,
completely disproven. In fact, again, I've got more research here, which will pop up on the screen, on that. Because see, so let me explain. So obviously, we talked about the 9 essential amino acids, and you need all of those in the right level to actually absorb protein.
Right.
So branched chain amino acids are only 3 of those amino acids. So it's leucine, isoleucine, and valine. And leucine is really the key one. So leucine is very important.
Yeah.
So leucine, if you think of it more as a signaling process, so it literally signals the body for that anabolic response, for protein muscle synthesis. And you need about 2.5 or 3 grams to stimulate the full amount of protein muscle synthesis. So that is absolutely true.
But you're not going to get enough of that. Is that the idea?
Well, if you take branched chain amino acids on their own, it's an incomplete protein, so they're completely useless. Yeah. Now, okay, you could say, well, if you took it with a meal and it was lacking in leucine, that would help. And it's funny because isoleucine and valine actually, they fight with leucine for absorption. So there's even some research showing that leucine on its own is better than taking the 3 together. But then the other argument is, well, when you take leucine, you absorb less of the other 2, so you take the other 2 to counteract that. But anyway, it's
a little convoluted.
But basically, BCAAs, forget about it. I mean, okay, if you needed to make sure your meal is enough leucine, taking a bit extra leucine can help.
Yeah.
But that's only, again, if you're taking poor quality protein to begin with. Once you're getting 2 to 3 grams of leucine, anything extra doesn't really make a difference.
So we want to focus on the essential amino acids, the EAAs.
Yeah. So what I do recommend, and again, in that, I think we talked about it earlier, even in the hospital where they gave them 15 grams of essential amino acids, it counteracted the protein loss. So so I take a full spectrum, all 9 essential amino acids with high amount of leucine, and that's the most effective. And free form means it requires no digestion.
Right.
So you really absorb every ounce of that. And again, another little study I'm going to pop up here, where when you take that with, say, 20 grams of protein, it increased the absorption. If you took, I think, 1 scoop, it was like 3-fold more protein muscle synthesis. 2 scoops was 6 times more.
Wow.
That's incredible.
So
way more protein muscle synthesis.
Yeah. Would you normally take that with just a regular meal to complete all the amino acids in that meal?
Yeah, in particular. Now, if I knew I was getting in like 100 grams of protein, I wouldn't bother.
Right.
But if you're taking in a meal and you're only getting 20 or 30 grams, then definitely take it. Now, if you really just want to be sure, take it all the time.
It's a good little insurance policy.
Meals, everything. It's phenomenal. There's no question that really works great.
That's great. Well, speaking of protein, let's talk about optimal levels. Some people, there's certain levels for maintaining muscle, and then there's a certain amount you can ingest to build muscle. What do you recommend for most people?
Yeah, because the RDA is basically enough just to bear, it's not optimal.
Stay alive.
Again, I have another research going to pop it up here where literally they say the RDA, which is 0.8 grams per kilogram, they always do it grams per kilogram.
I know. We're in America, baby.
So we always have to then convert it to pounds, so it's always tricky. But anyway.
But that's like 8.8 grams for what, 1.5 pounds?
Well, a kilogram is 2.2 pounds.
2.2.
Yeah, it's 2.2. So, so basically,
my conversions are off.
0.8, so you get half that, 0.4 or whatever.
Per pound,
so
basically.
So it's less than that per pound. And I would think that's way too low. And loads of people are questioning that. And they're saying, certainly not optimum. I mean, barely just enough to hold
I would say
on.
like double that is probably getting more to optimal.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would go. So here's, again, on the program that I'm working on, I would recommend as a baseline, I would recommend at least 0.5, maybe 0.6 grams per pound
of just overall body weight.
So that's more like 1.3-ish. I'd have to do the math on it, grams per kilogram. And right up to a gram per pound of body weight. So the way I look at it is you want a certain level of protein to maintain. And then at times you want to then increase your muscle, again, post a catabolic event. Or just in general, you want to reverse the aging process by 10 years, 20 years.
Absolutely.
And you want to go on a 3-month plan. Then I would go up as high as a gram per pound of body weight. And there's so many studies showing that the more protein, the better. And there's really they haven't really shown any negative effects of really high protein, even above that. Some people say, it's going to hurt your kidneys. All the research, if you currently have kidney issues, then too much protein is bad.
Sure.
But if you don't, it doesn't cause the problem.
Yeah.
So that's a big, big problem or big caveat. So, I would go at the low end, 0.5, 0.6 per pound of body weight, and all the way up to a gram per pound of body weight.
And especially if you're going to diet and you're trying to maybe reduce your calories to, lose some fat, really keep those protein levels up, because like we talked about earlier, you don't want to burn off your muscle with the fat.
Well, I have to jump into
studies what do you have?
On protein and weight loss, because this is the most compelling way to lose weight, and not only lose weight but preserve muscle while you lose weight.
Amazing.
And there are just endless studies. So you'll see direct correlation with increasing protein, because protein is also the most satiating. So it's very easy to lose weight when you increase your protein.
There's a thermal effect as well.
So for instance, one of the studies which will pop up is where they, instead of taking 15% of your diet with protein, they jumped it up to 30%. Now, they weren't told to try to lose weight, to reduce calories, anything like that. Just increase your protein. That's it. And what they found was, without trying, they were consuming 441 less calories per day, and they lost 11 pounds in 12 weeks.
Wow.
Effortlessly.
Just because they're more satiated?
Yeah, and the protein preserves the muscle much better. Wow. And I would pop up study after study here. We're just going to go bump, 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 because it's so compelling. And you'll see all these graphs where it's 25% compared to 15%. The weight loss is much greater. And again, for preserving muscle, which is the most important. So that's the one way that you can lose weight and not age at the same time, and for it not to be a catabolic event.
Just increasing your protein.
So it'd be nice to lose weight and not be 10 years older,
yeah.
right? Like in that
other thing we saw, yeah.
Yeah. So here's a way that you can preserve muscle while losing fat. It's just magic. Like, protein is just the way to go for weight loss, for anti-aging, for health, for metabolic health, for blood sugar control. I mean, get this right and your whole life will be transformed. You'll age longer with a higher quality of life, because even for falls and mobility and everything as we get older is crucial. So
that's a good pitch right there. You can
see why I'm so excited about it, because this will completely transform people's lives. And there's even a whole lot more, but I don't know. We're going to have to probably cut it, because we'll go on forever. I could talk for 10 hours on this. Maybe we'll do a part, deeper.
I have a feeling we'll talk about protein again.
Yeah, because it's.
But this is great, and I just want to encourage people, just stay tuned with us, because Thurston will be launching the protein plan pretty soon. So we're gonna have all this wrapped up with a beautiful bow and deliver it to you, that you can implement it into your life.
But I think we got through a lot of really crucial stuff to put people on the right path with this. And any questions or whatever comments, because we will do follow-ups of exactly how to implement.
Yeah, maybe we'll throw in an episode of just Ask Thurston questions. We'll answer some questions.
AMA.
All right.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you next time on the Resistance Podcast.
See you soon.